Hello viewers, here is a Living Solutions so-called high velocity fan. It's model MF-9. No idea what in the world the MF could possibly stand for. Made in China. It looks like to have a date code of 12/14, so probably from 2014. If I'm not mistaken, that other high velocity fan I got out of the trash was from the same year. And as much as I'd like to say this thing is a piece of junk, I can't really, because it's ran enough hours to get this dirty and it still works. It can't be all that bad. So I'm going to plug it up here and we'll just give it a quick test run. If you want to see the full test run, you can go back and watch the initial checkout video, but I'll turn this on here. Oh, the bearings is locked up, I guess. There it goes. So this has so much dust in it that it just doesn't move any air. It actually is moving air kind of backwards, like out the sides. Yeah, no airflow. So it desperately needs to be serviced. The bearings are having some anomaly to them, although actually they don't seem like they're all that bad. Well, anyways, let's get inside this and see what we can do. I think we have four screws around the guard. Go ahead and take those out. And those are going to come out. That probably has a lot to do with why it's not moving in the air, because there's nowhere for the air to go. And here's the blades. Let's see here. It uses a standard Phillips or common screw to get it off. Let's see if I can break that off. Screw seems kind of soft. Yeah, it's fixing a strip. Great. There we go. That broke free. There's a lot to be said about having the right size screwdriver. That came right off, surprisingly enough. And actually, I have to say, this is a pretty well made blade. It's got a nice steel riveted hub. Of course, I'm sure the blades themselves are just stamped aluminium, but not bad, especially for something real cheap. Here's a good look at the dust that's on there. This appears to be some kind of a ticker towel or something. Anyways, we'll get that cleaned. And now I want to remove the motor. It's going to be these two bottom screws for the motor. And let's get the control cover off with these two screws. Wash that. And speed out just pulls off. And then now how do we get the switch? Looks like it's got two, zoom this in here, zoom in. It's got these two little tabs here, so I'm going to pull those to the sides, preferably without everything coming apart. Okay, Well, ideally that would have been done a little bit more evenly. But there's that. And I'm hoping this entire assembly can just be removed from the grills, and it looks like it can be with these two screws here. So I'll be able to just wash the guards in water and not have to be concerned about the electronics and or the removal from the rest of the thing. Perfect. Exactly what I wanted. Now in a perfect world, this piece would come completely off, but we don't live in a perfect world and it doesn't. But what it will do, if I remove the strain relief, is it will slide down the cord enough that I can still wash it and not worry about getting the motor wet. Although I do have to worry about getting the plug wet because it's a crazy fuse plug and not a molded or waterproof plug. So I'll just slide this down the cord here, and I'll just go maybe halfway like that so I can put that in the sink and whatever. So I'm going to go ahead and take all these things over to the sink now, and we're going to wash them off. Now we're going to service the motor. Very short shaft on this. Kind of an odd design. Anyway, so we're going to brush off all the dust, or most of the dust anyways. That's good enough, I think. And actually the back of the motor is pretty clean. But we're going to open up the bearings and service them properly anyways, just because when I do things I do it right, and that often means doing it all the way. So we're going to do that here this time as well. So now we're going to undo these two screws up on the either side of the shaft, and it is a bolt on the other side. The first one came off with no extra assistance, but the second one is going to need to be held in place. And there's a little bit of junk on the shaft there. Zoom this thing in here. You can see that junk on the shaft right by the bearing. I want to get that off before attempting to remove the bearing. That will just scrape up the bearing and cause problems. That's enough of it to come off. So we'll just pull this out. Whoops. At this point it just kind of pulls apart. We get the front, the back. You don't want to lose the orientation of the motor, because if you put it back together wrong, it'll spin the wrong direction. So the back bearing, front bearing, and that just slid right off, so that's good. The back bearing actually is kind of sticky. The back part of the shaft rather is kind of sticky, so I'm going to go ahead and clean that off. And because it's still sticky, I'm going to take some detergent oil, and this is where you use the red can. Take some detergent oil and put that on here, and I'm going to run this through the bearing, and this is going to kind of clean it out. Okay, so now I'm going to take my cloth and clean off all that oil, and you can see the shaft is much cleaner than it was before now. It doesn't have that orange or red or whatever color it is sticky junk on there. Get all that off of there. And then for the bearing, take the ticker towel like this and kind of pull this through here. And you can take a pointing tool. I'm not sure what the actual name of this is, but you can take the pointing tool and kind of use that to move the cloth around inside there and get that real clean. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the front bearing. It's really not that dirty, but I will use the detergent oil again anyways, just for good practice. And that was a little bit too much. I'm going to slip this back on. I'll let this spin around in there. It'll loosen up and work away all the dirt that's in there. And now I'll do the same thing. I'll clean the shaft off. Okay, and then I will clean this other bearing as well. This bearing is actually pretty clean. There's not much of any dirt coming out. So now that these bearings are clean, we're going to go ahead and put it back together now. And I'm going to take the fan oil. This is very important. This is different now. We're using a different kind of oil. This oil is for fans, and this is what I'm going to put in the bearings to lubricate it for fans. I'm going to put some oil onto the shaft here, a generous amount since there's no lubrication in here at all as it stands right now. And I'm going to put this into the bearing. I'm going to do the same thing on the front, generous amount, slip this bearing on. And now I want to screw this back together. And this does not have to go very tight. It just needs to be firm and it needs to be even. So you don't want to torque it down all the way on one side. I like to torque it down evenly and slowly on both sides. And now it may not spin freely when you first put it back together, and in this case it's hardly spinning at all, and this is normal. Take a screwdriver and just kind of smack the shaft a little bit and it'll start to free up. You may have to do this a handful of times to get it to where it needs to be. See, it's getting pretty free now. And a little bit more. You can see that's spinning very freely now. Alright, so the motor is now serviced and ready to go. I'm I see oil in both sides of the bearings coming out, so that's a good enough amount of oil. I'm not going to add any more oil. So I'm going to put this away, and now I'll get the rest of the parts and we can begin to reassemble. Okay, so we're going to begin reassembling now. The cord has to get pulled back through to where it was. And before we do anything else, I'm going to go ahead and put that strain relief back on so I know that the cord is in the right position. Okay, and now the motor has to go through the hole in the back. And this is going to get screwed into place. Like that. And the switch will make sure to, ouch, jeez, that really hurt. Okay, anyways, the switch, make sure the wires aren't coming out. And this goes in like this. And this is another thing that you want to make sure it goes back on the way it came out, because otherwise the speeds won't line up on the labels. And there's an awful lot of slack behind all this, behind the motor here. I guess it's just kind of sits in there like that, I don't know. Or unless, is this gonna, yeah, maybe it goes like that actually. That makes a little bit more sense. Perhaps it tucks in there like that. Yeah, I think that works. Actually, before that goes on, what just happened to the camera? Before that goes on, this has to go on to cover some of the cords here. Yeah, we're just going to go with that. I think that's fine. Okay, that's the motor. That's the wrong screw. Okay, it's spinning pretty good. And now the switch just presses back on. It's full of water. I gotta take care of that first. Okay, without any water in it, put the switch back on. Now I'll go get the blade and the front guards, and then we'll give it a test. Before we finish, I just want to give it a quick test run and make sure the motor is good. Okay, that is running on all 3 speeds. So let's get the blade on. The blade is not completely clean. It's cosmetically a little bit jacked up, but I'm not going to spend the time on it getting it any better for something that's just going to be used. This is not a display piece. What I do want to do, because it was hard to get off, I'm going to put some oil, very small amount of oil, onto the screw that's going to go in here. So this way, when it comes time to service it again, it will not be so locked up. And it should make it substantially easier to service. Oh, this is going to be a pain to get back in. Oh, for heaven's sakes. And the oil is all over the place now. Daggone it. And this is probably out of the view of the camera. That's back in, and the little slot on the shaft right there aligns up with where the screw goes, so slip this onto the shaft, and then what I like to do is screw the screw in slowly. Okay, so that's not locked in place yet. So right now the screw is holding the blade on because of that little notch. So now I know that the screw is in the right place. I'm going to screw it in all the way and tighten it just enough to be pretty snug. You can see the bearings are much happier than they were before now. Okay, so now we're ready to put the guard back on. It's just the same 4 screws that we took off before. Really nothing interesting about this part, so I'm going to go ahead and cut the other 3 out of the video. Okay, it's all back together. It's looking pretty nice now. Time to test it out. Plug it up, and we'll start with low. Certainly sounds much better now, and it's actually moving a lot of air. Look at that. Much better than before. Now let's go to medium. Pretty strong breeze, actually. that doesn't leave much to be desired at all. And high. Whoops, that's low. That was fairly anticlimactic. Yeah, that is actually really quite powerful. And we'll do a spin down. Alright, so I have to say, that's not bad at all. It doesn't compare to like a Lakewood HV9, for instance. It's not quite as powerful, but this is definitely decent. And in a world where a lot of products really aren't, it's notable when you come across one that is. Now, I don't know how much longer this thing is going to last. A lot of these cheap C-frame motors tend to have bearing issues relatively quickly, but for now, this seems like a really decent product. And I have to say, Living Solutions thus far, at least from my experience, has never produced a product that totally stinks. Everything I've used from them was pretty decent. So there we go, another one saved from the trash. Successful cleaning and servicing of this Living Solutions 9-inch high velocity fan. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.